Hey guys, so the last thing we're going to have a look at here is an example. So I've modified the code a bit, and let's say we wanted to add a filtering functionality to to-dos. So we're going to look at how you can do that using selectors and using a little library by the same guys that made Redux again called reselect. So I'm going to teach you about selectors quickly. So I've kind of set this up, but I haven't completely finished it. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish it. So you can actually see now I can add a to-do and I have this new filter box. So when we look at, so we've now got this update filter text. I've added a little bit more to the Redux store. I've got filter text. So I've got the same stuff I had before, and I've also got this filter text. And so this is really in line with what we were saying before. I've got the minimum amount of stuff in the store I can. So I've got the to-dos, I've got the filter text. And yeah, like if I have a to-do called ABC and I put ABC in, then that should be in there. But that's something we can calculate given that we know what the to-dos are and that there's one with ABC, and we know that the filter text is currently set to ABC. So it's what I call computed or derived data. And in other kind of libraries that came before this new fancy stuff, it was often called computed or derived in things like Knockout and other technologies. So let's get into how we can do something like that. So let's have a look at. So I've set all that up. You should be pretty capable of doing that. So the other thing I've done is I've changed some code here. Let's have a look at that. So obviously I've added an action and I added some reduced code to get that done, and I had to change my components to add the box and blah blah blah. But that's pretty straightforward. So what have I done here? So I've imported a selector from the selectors folder, which is another folder I like to have inside my Redux folder with my selectors in, funnily enough. And I've imported the to-do selector. And now what I've done in this lambda here, which I really call, I think Redux refers to it as map state to props function. So gives you a state and you need to give it the props really that you want to produce. So which bits of state do I care about, and stuff like that. And so the first thing I wanted to show you actually is that before we had this code in here, so it's like state.todos. So you can actually do what you want in here. So you can do something like, so we also have users in this application. So you could do like, I'm going to factor this out into a separate function. So like map state to props. You probably won't have this as a separate function for long if you get into this stuff. And I'm going to make it a nice big function so we can see what we're doing. Right now we're saying this, right? This is what we had. Let's put that in here because this is a const, right, which is just the code's going to run through here. This is going to be a lambda, so we can just substitute this in here. Fine. So let's have a look. Okay, so that's all still working. Great. So what else could we do? So something that's quite common to want to do is actually grab two bits of state at once. So we also have the user state. It's empty, but it's there. So we could also do that. So that's not valid. So I think then what you'd have to do, right, is you'd have to do this. So we can return every time the store changes, this function gets called. So it will grab the to-dos part of the store and grab the user part. And obviously you could have a lot more parts to your store. So grabbing two is not necessarily grabbing everything. In most cases, normally it's just you're going to grab some subset that this container cares about. So yeah, here we could do that. Now obviously a lot of this code's now wrong. So let's quickly, so anywhere we have .props, nearly anywhere we have .props, I think it's just those three. It will now be like this, to-dos. So this .props.todos, let's quickly check that that's right. Absolutely not right. Oh, no. Had too little faith there. Yeah, so that looks good. So cool. So that's all still working. Great. So let's have a look. Let's recap that. So now in our map state to props, we've said this. Now you can write this on one line, which is probably, You know what? If I saw this, I wouldn't be that upset with that. But if you do want to write it on one line, then it's still just pure JavaScript. So it's just a question of like how good your JavaScript foo is. So if you write, so the one way you could sort of think about writing this on one line, if you're, it depends how advanced your JavaScript is. So for some of you this might be really obvious, for others it won't be. So you could sort of think about writing it like that. But for those of you who are in the know, that's not valid JavaScript, because kind of what you're saying here is like, it sees it as like kind of this, because it's like, oh, some brackets, that's a lambda, and then this is not valid JavaScript. So you'll get a really shitty error from Babel, which will just be like, we'll just laugh at you and be like, no, you've tried to, you know, say this in a statement, and that's obviously wrong. So if you want to write a one-line lambda where you immediately return an object, because objects use this curly bracket and so do lambdas, it gets confused, so you can put them in normal brackets and that will work just fine. So this is what I would normally do. So we can now delete that. So that's the same as what we had before. So that's like an interesting thing to know, that you can mess around with your maps to props. Now what selectors are and what reselect is really just a maps to props function. So it's really just this bit here, but making one that's more advanced. And so it's two things: making one that's more advanced, perhaps than, I mean, the one we have here is pretty basic, really. The one we had first of all was extremely basic. This one's still quite basic. What we're really going to get onto now is doing calculations in here, so computing some derived data. And what reselect does, so say you're doing quite a complex calculation in here, the problem that you then might run into is that calculation, anytime anything in the store, even if you don't care about it, changes, this function gets run. So if this function is something that's a little bit complicated and fiddly, it will get run every single time. So what reselect does is it lets you declare up front, these are the parts of the store I care about, and now here's my calculation I want to do. And what reselect will do is it takes care of some performance stuff for you. So every time the store changes, reselect will have a look at the bits of the store you said you cared about, and if they haven't changed, it won't rerun your stuff. So it's basically a performance optimization to sort of say, well, the bits that I was only subscribed to, like, you know, I only really cared about like to-dos and user, but, you know, actually the cats part of the store has changed, so don't really care, so I won't run this function again. So it's just kind of, it's just an optimization really, but it's really just a map to state to props function with that optimization. So let's jump into how that actually works. So I'm going to switch this back to calling. So you could do this. It's probably like a fine thing to do, like that. So we're saying return a to-dos, you know, an object with a to-dos key, and then in the to-dos we're going to call the to-do selector. You normally pass the entire state into selectors. I don't think you have to, but it seems to be how it goes down. So let's have a look at the selector. First of all, I'm just going to quickly check that still works. Right, that looks good. So let's have a look. Let's get straight into it. So the first thing is, the library in question here is called reselect. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, so it's pretty, the docs for this library are, the docs for Redux in general are not your friend, which is part of the reason I'm making this video series. Reselect is one of the most amazing, powerful bits of Redux, and it probably has the most terrible documentation out of the lot as far as it's not that it's like wrong, or it's just, if you're just trying to get into it, and you don't really know, you know, that this even exists, like you might stumble across it. And as I said earlier on, it took me about 3 attempts to like understand this stuff, and it's really not that hard. That's what's all of this stuff I'm showing you today is not that hard at all, but the resources that exist on the internet just suck. They're just shit. So there are a few things out there that are starting to get better. I think it's because Redux is quite an advanced topic and people like to pretend it's some big fancy thing, but it's not as fancy as it seems once you get into it. So this is the library really we're using, reselect, right? But you might have noticed in this code, I've not actually required reselect. I've required reselect change memwise. Memwise is like a functional programming concept, which means that if you call a function twice with the same things, then it will just remember the last answer or something, so it won't recalculate it. basically it's like a performance kind of caching thing to like stop it from recalculating things it doesn't need to cache twice. So I don't know why they've put that word in here, but what this library does, it's a lightweight wrapper around reselect, and it logs things to the console, which is incredibly useful, especially when you're learning. So you can see here, as I'm logging stuff now, there are these extra log messages. So it says to-dos, and this is my to-do selector. So it shows me like what it was last time and what it is this time. But basically it lets you see the output. So you can see here the output of my to-dos, which is like obviously really useful because as you're writing your, it shows me the output of my to-do selector, which is something you're going to want to see on the console, just like we like seeing this. So it's kind of like Redux Logger, but for reselect. You could write your own. It's pretty trivial to write your own, and it might be advisable. I use this library. It seems to work fine for most cases. So let's get into how we might write to-do selector. So if you were just using reselect, you wouldn't have this. But this is just the name, so that when it logs, it goes here. It's just literally whatever goes here. So you can kind of ignore this bit. This is just because I'm using this thing. So the first thing is you get n parts of state you care about. So I only care about one, so I just have one line here. But they're lambdas, so I care about state. So you get state in, and I care about state.todos. Let's say I also cared about users. User, I think it is. You can do that, and you can keep going. You can have a whole bunch. Usually 2 or 3. Probably I don't think I've done more than 4. But yeah, you can subscribe. So basically, you're telling reselect, these are the parts of the store I care about for this selector. Cool. And then in here, so then you get in here. So I'll show you quickly let's add users back, or user. So then you get, for each one of these things you get a param in here. So you would also get user state. Yeah, so you've got both of these params. This would be whatever is in the to-do part of the store, and this is whatever is in the user part of the store. Then you combine them, or do some stuff, computations, whatever you want to do, and you return something. And then that's what you'll get when you use this thing in your component, if I can find it here. So then this function, the output of that bottom bit is what comes in here, and it's what goes in props. So the clever part of reselect really, so this is really just a maps to props function really, this bit. So I guess the maps to props function kind of look like this. It was like stay arrow and then like do some stuff. So like I guess like return. And so then we've got state.todos, and we've got like state.users. We can talk about those wherever we want in here. So that's cool. But this is a little bit different. You're saying I care about this bit. I care about this bit. Okay, there's the first bit. There's here's the to-dos from the first one. Here's the user state from the second one. And you can have as many as you want, n of these things if you like. Then you combine them together and return something. So let's jump into the filtering. So we can get the filter. I'm gonna break this down. So the filter text. Let's go get that. So that would be in to-do state.filter text. Why is it there? Let's have a look. I think it's there. You can double check. So if we look in like here, you got to-dos. The filter text isn't there until you type something. Interesting. Right, here you go. So to-dos filter text. So we've got that. So that would be in to-do state, because that's state.todos, right? That's this dot filter text. So we've got the filter text, and where are the to-dos? They're in to-dos, I think. They're in the to-do state in the to-dos. So we've got the to-dos, right? And now what we really want to do, so what I've done here, we don't actually care about users, so I'll get rid of that stuff again. But you can do it, and that's a very common use case. I'll talk about it more in a minute. So here what we're really trying to do is we're trying to take the to-do state, and then we're trying to add a new key called filtered to-dos, let's call it. So it's like, which to-do should I currently be showing given the to-dos I've got in my store and given the filter that the user's set. So the reason this is working right now, by the way, is because I've returned an array and I've spread to-do state into it. So I've basically just returned to-do state, so I've not changed anything. So what's coming out the other side is the same as what came in, and so because that's just the the to-dos like state, that works. But we can change. I guess like a cool thing to do would be, let's just put like an extra thing in, like something static. So let's do that. Let's just have a look at that. just show you. It's kind of dull, but it's good to see. So see, now we've got hello world in here as well. But if we look in the store, this is the critical thing. You look in the store hasn't changed, right? We don't have hello world in here. So this can be the minimal set of stuff. So what we're really looking to add here is we want to keep all the to-do state, right? Because we like that stuff and it was good and everything was working. But we also want to add, you know, filtered to-dos. So that's like the list of to-dos. Let's make that an empty array, right? Let's check that. So these are the list of to-dos that you want to show, given the filter text that the user's entered into that box at the top, and given the to-dos. So let's have a look at what that comes to. So like ABC. So filter to-dos is empty. So I'm going to go ahead straight away and I'm going to hook this up. It should be really quick. So I think they're called filtered to-dos, and I think that's it. It's just always going to be empty now. So no matter what I do, right, it's always empty. Let's have a look. So filter to-dos we hard coded, right? So it's always empty. To-dos now has one. But to-dos does have one in here, so that's cool. So let's make this work. Let's actually calculate what should filtered to-dos be. So I'm just going to do const here, and you can inline as much stuff as you want. Filtered to-dos. So filtered to-dos is some kind of, I use Lodash because I'm just super familiar with it, and I know they've built a lot of this stuff in now. I kind of just like having access to their docs, and also the null safety of it's good. But here we go. So to-dos. So we want to filter the to-dos, and then how do we want to filter them? So for each to-do, we're going to write our lambda in the filter. Hopefully you guys know filter. So really we want to say, does the to-do, I think it's .text, right? Let's just double check that. Please show me. So each to-do has some text, so that's cool. So to-do.text, does that include the filter text? That's like pretty dumb filtering, but like that's fine. So you'll only get the filter. So this filter to-dos is all of the to-dos from the state. You're filtering them, and then for each one you're saying, does the text include the filter text that was in the state, right? So filter to-dos is going to be a subset of to-dos. Maybe none of them, maybe all of them. So that's kind of going to work. Let's jump into that and to-dos. I'm going to debug it. Big fan of debugging. If you want to learn how things work, it's a really good way for me. I'm going to put a breakpoint here, so that's wrong. So we're going to refresh that. Maybe Chrome's going to do what we need done. Yeah, it's random breakpoint. Thanks. Thanks very much. So you can see that gets called right off the bat. Cool. So initially the to-dos was empty, so filtered to-dos also going to be empty because you filter nothing, you get nothing. So now let's add. So you notice this is getting called every time. So it's getting called every time. I just changed. So you see I fired an action. Well, you can sort of see it here. The logger hasn't even happened yet, but because I fired the action, the store has changed, and it just hasn't quite logged yet. But when it's going to log in a second when I hit play, and because I'm subscribed to state.todos, and I've literally changed the value of what is it currently editing to do, the text in there, it's refired this, so it's recalculating all the time. So it's pretty powerful because this is very functional. So it's like you give me some Redux store state, and you like calculate some sort of derived version of it. So like, you know, you can add things, you can do things like currency formatting, date formatting, super useful to do in here, like making things very human readable, like very friendly, so that your components are just like, okay, I'm going to grab that straight out of the selector and put it on the screen. Your components get stupider because a lot of the core logic ends up in selectors, and selectors actually in this model often end up having the most core logic of the app, I find. Reducers have some, but they're normally pretty simple, and actions are the same, and selectors actually can get quite confusing, and they can get a little bit unwieldy, so you got to keep an eye on them. So let's play that through. So that came through, right? So now let's have a look. So filter to-dos is still nothing. Let's add this. I think there might have been an error. And there's an error because I think this is actually includes. Okay, I'm going to remove this breakpoint for a sec because it's going to fire all the time otherwise. Okay, cool. So now I've added A. Cool. So here we go. So to-dos is got A in it. The to-do we just added. Filters to-dos is empty. Now that's because filter text is undefined because we haven't even put anything in that box. So I think what we want to really say, so the logic here is not quite right. Let's see if it works when we put, so now we don't see any to-dos, that to-dos disappeared. Let's put an A in the filter box. So now the filter text is A, because we've grabbed that part from the store, and to-dos is this thing, and now filter to-dos, because it matches, has this thing, so now we see it up here. So that's really cool. So let's change this code around a little bit. The bug here is that if we've not said anything in filter text, we just want to show all the to-dos, right? That's kind of where we're going wrong. So we can do that. What's the best way of coding that? Probably this. So if it's empty, then show the to-dos, otherwise filter. Now this is a ternary, hopefully most of you guys are familiar with this. What I'm probably going to do here, just for clarity, is just write a quick filter to-dos function. Like this. So I'm like, I've got the to-dos coming in, and what I really want is like this code. So if, I'm going to write it bigger, as in like more lines to make it clearer. So if it's empty, just return to-dos, right? Otherwise, we want to do this filter stuff. So this is just a logical rework of that same code. So if the filter search is empty, return to-dos. Otherwise, filter the to-dos based on the ones which include the filter search term, right? And then we need to call this from in here. Filter to-dos, to-dos, filter text. Cool. So now we've got the filter to-dos, and we've cleaned up this case, kind of like the empty, you know, maybe this thing's empty. Let's have a look, see if that works. So if I add ABC in here and add that, cool, I see it. Let's add hello banana. Cool. So now if I type in A, ignore these console errors, I think I've screwed something up, but ABC, and you can see. And the thing is, right, that you can sort of tell, hopefully from this video as well, the performance is sweet. This is where like Redux and React is amazing. Is that, you know, it's super lightning fast, but you've written all your code in a very functional way, and this concept of selectors is super powerful because we're not storing in here, right? So just to recap, we've got the 3 to-dos and we've got the filter text, and if I type an A in here, right, we'll get, you know, filter text is A, 3 to-dos, but it's the selector that's doing the hard work. So the to-dos are still in there, and there's 3 of them, but then you've got the, I'm looking in the wrong place, you've got the filter to-dos in the selector. There's only 2 of those because only 2 of them match, and if I start typing banana, right, only one of them is going to match. You can see it there, filter to-dos 1, array 1, and that's the banana. So it's amazingly powerful concept. So the rule of thumb: store the minimal amount of stuff you can in Redux stores and state. Just store the stuff you need to store. Don't store, you know, don't keep it dry. Basically, don't repeat yourself. And then use selectors. You can use selectors like we've done here. We just use a selector on one part, you know, one reducer. We didn't even combine 2. But what's amazingly powerful that we're doing in a lot of the apps we're writing is you can combine 2 bits of the store. So if you're familiar with SQL, which maybe some of you aren't, it's kind of like a join concept. You might have some, so like say you have let's say you're cloning Facebook and you have Facebook posts, right, that people are posting, and then you have users. And posts have users, but they just have like the user's ID. They don't have like the full user in there, but you have a separate API call you can make to go and get a user. What you can do is, when you load the posts, you can load them in and then go and load the correct users into Redux Store. So now you've got some posts which, you know, don't have the users on them. They just have like an ID, like ID number 1, that's Richard from ZDev, and then you'll have like your users. and so you'll have like ID number 1, you know, Richard from ZDev, and then what you can do in a selector is combine the two so that you can get the posts and you can put the users onto the post. You can map over the posts, and for each post you can go and find that user. That's incredibly powerful because now you're combining different bits of data and putting them together, and your components will get ridiculously simpler from doing that. Because before you'd be like, okay, I need to connect to like 2 different parts of Redux state and like go get this stuff. Now you're like putting all of that logic into selectors. And another thing we've not really talked about, but it's a big advantage of Redux and all of the stuff we've just discussed throughout this series, is you can reuse these reducers and selectors for different components. So I mean, it depends on the app you're building, but I mean, I guess some examples are like, what's a good example? Maybe like, let's say Facebook messages. So you've got the the messages on the website, and you've got the messages in the Messenger app on your phone. So because now React Native exists and you can reuse all of this stuff between React Native and a React website, you could code your Facebook clone in React for the web. And you could write messages, you have like a messages store and maybe a selector and some actions and some other stuff. And then you're like, okay, now I want to write a native app in React Native, right? I'm going to write it for iOS, say, and Android, whatever. You can reuse all of your reducers, all of your actions, and all of your selectors to get the same structure. So all your API calls, which will probably be living in your actions, you'll have access to the same store and the same selectors, and probably, even though those two apps are on completely different platforms, React and React Native are not compatible at all, but because all the stuff underneath is, you can just connect up a React Native component, use the selector in the store, and off you go. And you've already done all you need to do is write the React components which render the messages in the correct way and fire the correct actions when the appropriate things happen. And maybe there'll be some stuff that doesn't exactly overlap, but the code sharing you can get from that is crazily good. And it's also true even within one app. You're building one website, it's quite common that there'll be multiple views that display data in a different way, like different pages that are based on the same data. So the same stores are useful, and maybe have a couple of different selectors to like show that data in a different way. Maybe it's a graphing thing, and one thing's aggregating by month and one thing's aggregating by week. Maybe you decide to have a couple of selectors for that. Maybe or maybe you do it in a different way, but you can reuse a heck of a lot of stuff in between different components in your app if that's like an appropriate thing. It's very, very powerful, and it's just enjoyable to work with. It's really a game-changing. The design pattern is really the big deal, but Redux has been, there's MobX, which is supposed to be pretty good as well, but Redux has really been, it's currently the most popular, and it's got most of these concepts in, and it's got, it's actually implemented brilliantly. It's just the thing that I've kind of felt has let it down a little bit. It's just the accessibility for people that don't really know how to do it, and that's why we created this video series. So I hope you've enjoyed watching along. Click subscribe if you enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll see you again in some more videos in the future.